She called me a hoarder at my own retirement party. Not quietly, not in a corner somewhere. She said it loud enough that my brother-in-law put down his glass of wine and looked at the floor. She said it in front of 42 people who had driven from 3 states to celebrate 31 years of my career. And she smiled while she said it. That kind of smile that's dressed up as a joke, but everyone in the room knows it isn't. That was the night I understood that my daughter-in-law had never respected me. Not once. Not for a single day of the 6 years she had been married to my son. I want to tell you what happened after that. I want to tell you what I did, but first you need to understand who I am and what I had built, because none of what comes later makes any sense without that. My name is Walter. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. The last 11 of those as department head. I raised my son, Nathan, alone after his mother passed away from ovarian cancer when he was 9 years old. I worked double shifts some months. I packed his lunches. I drove him to soccer practice on Tuesday nights and sat in the bleachers in the rain. I helped him with algebra at the kitchen table until 11 o'clock at night, when I had a 7 a.m. meeting the next morning. I did all of it without complaining, because that's what you do. That is what a father does. When Nathan was in college, I bought a house. Not a flashy house. A 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, with a workshop in the backyard where I spent my evenings building furniture. Good furniture. A dining table I was proud of. A rocking chair I made for my own father before he died. I put everything I had into that house and into that workshop and into that boy, and I watched him grow into someone I thought I knew. He met Melissa at 26. She was sharp, which I respected. She had opinions, which I didn't mind. She had an edge to her, a way of talking over people that I noticed from the first dinner, but I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. My son loved her. That was what mattered. They got engaged after 2 years. I offered to help with the wedding costs because Nathan had just started a new job and I knew they were stretched. Not a blank check. A real conversation, sitting at my kitchen table, where I said I could put in $20,000 toward the venue and the catering. That was a significant portion of my retirement savings. I offered it because that's what fathers do. Because I loved my son and I wanted his wedding to be something he remembered without the shadow of debt over it. Melissa looked at the number, looked at Nathan, and then looked back at me. That's a start, she said. I thought I'd heard her wrong. Nathan didn't say anything. He was studying the tablecloth. I added another $5,000 2 months later when the venue they chose came in over budget. I didn't argue. I wrote the check. The wedding was beautiful. I'll say that, honestly. The venue was a restored barn outside of Dublin, Ohio. White lights strung across the rafters, good food, a live band. I sat at the head table and I watched my son dance with his wife, and I felt something that was very close to happiness. Then, during the cocktail hour, Melissa pulled me aside near the bar. She was still in her dress. Her hair was done up. She looked like a photograph. She said, "Walter, we've been thinking. The house makes a lot more sense for us than it does for you. You're retiring. You don't need all that space. We could convert the workshop into a guest suite and really make it work." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "That's my home." She said, "It's a lot of upkeep for one person." I said, "I built most of what's in it with my own hands." She said, "Nathan and I have talked about this." I looked over at my son across the room. He was laughing at something his cousin had said. He didn't look over at me. I told her it wasn't something I was interested in discussing, especially not tonight, and I walked back to the table. She didn't bring it up again that night. But I didn't forget it. Something had shifted, and I knew it had shifted, the way you know a weather change in your knees before the clouds even arrive. They came for dinner most Sunday evenings after that. Melissa was pleasant at the table, mostly. She had started working in real estate, which suited her. She talked a lot about property values, about what homes were selling for in my neighborhood, about how the market had gone through the roof. She said things like, "Your lot alone is worth close to 400,000. The way other people might say, "Pass the salt." I'd hear her walking through the rooms after dinner, her heels on the hardwood, pausing in doorways. I told myself she was curious. I told myself I was being uncharitable. My retirement date was set for the first Friday of March. My department had planned a party. Conference room, sheet cake. The mayor came by for 20 minutes to shake hands. It was a good afternoon. My colleagues of many years said the right things, and I meant it when I said I would miss them. The real party was that Saturday evening at a steakhouse in Worthington. 42 people. My brother-in-law and his wife drove up from Kentucky. My neighbor of 20 years, a woman named Anne, came with her husband. Several old friends, a few of Nathan's friends who had grown up at my kitchen table. I was glad, genuinely glad. 31 years is a long time to give to anything, and it felt right to mark it. At some point during dinner, I mentioned that I was thinking of taking a woodworking class at the community college, just to learn some new techniques. There was a joinery course I'd been watching for 3 years and finally had the time for. Melissa looked up from her plate. She said, "You're not seriously going to keep doing all that, are you? With your back?" I said my back was fine. She said, "All that stuff in the workshop. Nathan said you haven't even used half of it in years." Nathan said nothing. I said, "I use it every week." She said, "You know what I mean. All those boxes in the second bedroom. All your wife's things." The table went quiet. My wife had been gone for 28 years. I still kept some of her things. A box of photographs. A cardigan. A small ceramic owl she'd bought at a craft fair the summer before she was diagnosed. I kept them in the second bedroom on the top shelf of the closet. They did not take up much space and they were mine to keep. Melissa said, "I just think, at some point," and she looked around the table in a way that suggested she was bringing the group in on her side. "At some point, Walter, it becomes hoarding." I heard Anne set her fork down. I heard my brother-in-law clear his throat. I looked at my son. He picked up his wine glass. I want to be careful here about what I say I felt, because I have spent the months since then trying to be precise about it. I did not feel rage. What I felt was something colder. A kind of settling, like a decision had been made somewhere in my chest without my having to think about it. I smiled at the table and I changed the subject. Melissa did not notice that anything had happened. Nathan called me Monday morning. He said Melissa hadn't meant anything by it, that she was just trying to be helpful, that she worried about me living alone in a big house. I let him talk. When he finished, I told him I appreciated him calling. I didn't tell him what I was thinking. There was no reason to. What I was thinking was this. I needed to talk to an attorney. I had a will, a simple one, written years ago, leaving everything to Nathan. The house, the savings, everything. I had never revisited it because I had never had reason to. My son was my son. I called a friend who practices estate law, and I made an appointment for the following Thursday. I want to be honest with you about something. Walking into that office, I was not angry. I was not bitter. I was clear. There is a difference that is hard to explain, but it is real. Anger is hot and sloppy, and it makes you do things you regret. What I felt was more like when you've been looking at a problem for a long time from the wrong angle, and then something shifts, and you can suddenly see the shape of it. I could see the shape of it clearly. My friend is thorough. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything. She didn't express an opinion about my family. She just helped me understand my options. I had several. Over the next 6 weeks, I made a series of changes. The house was the first thing. I placed it in a revocable living trust, naming myself as trustee. What that means is that the house remained mine, completely, in every practical sense. I could live in it, sell it, do anything I wanted with it, but it also meant that when I died, it would not pass through probate and could not easily be contested. More importantly, I named the beneficiary of that trust as a land trust connected to a local conservation organization I had supported for years. They preserve green spaces around central Ohio. I had donated to them for a decade. It felt right. The savings accounts were next. I restructured them. I set aside what I needed to live comfortably for the rest of my life, with some cushion. The remainder, I began moving into a donor-advised fund, which is a way of making charitable gifts over time in a tax-efficient way. Once money goes into a donor-advised fund, it is irrevocably committed to charitable purposes. Nathan and Melissa could not touch it. Nathan was the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. I called the insurance company and changed that. I did all of this quietly, over the course of about a month and a half. I told no one. I still had Sunday dinners with them. I still listened to Melissa talk about property values. I still passed the rolls. The Sunday after I'd finished everything, Nathan mentioned that he and Melissa had been talking to a financial advisor about their future. He said they had been thinking about their long-term picture. He looked at me a certain way when he said it. Melissa was refilling her water glass. I said, "That sounds smart." She said, "It's important to have a plan." I said, "I completely agree. I want you to understand that I did not enjoy this moment the way you might expect. There was no satisfaction in watching them talk about a future that was already not what they imagined." What I felt was something closer to grief, actually. This was my son. This was supposed to be my family. The loss of that picture, the one when Nathan and I grow old in easy company, where there are holidays that feel warm, where I leave something behind that he carries forward with some sense of what it cost me to build it. That loss was real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I had clarity, and clarity, when you've lived long enough, is its own kind of peace. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when I sat Nathan down alone. Melissa was at a showing. I had asked Nathan to stop by, told him I wanted to talk about something. He came in, got himself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table the way he had sat there 10,000 times before. I told him I had redone my estate planning. He nodded, not alarmed yet. I told him I had moved the house into a trust. I told him who the beneficiary was. He looked at me. I told him about the donor-advised fund. He said, "Dad." I said, "Let me finish." I told him about the insurance policy. I told him all of it, calmly, the way you read a balance sheet. Just the numbers. Just the facts. When I finished, there was a long silence. He said, "Why?" I said, "Because the Sunday dinners aren't about me, Nathan. They haven't been for a long time." He said Melissa was just adjusting to having an older father-in-law. He said she meant well. He said I was being oversensitive about one comment at a party. I said, "She called your mother's things hoarding in front of 40 people. He was quiet. I said, "You picked up your wine glass." He didn't answer that. I told him I wasn't asking for an apology and I wasn't issuing an ultimatum. I told him I loved him and that wouldn't change. But I also told him that what I did with what I had built was my decision alone, and I had made it, and it was done. He left without finishing his water. I sat at that kitchen table for a while after he left. The house was quiet in the way houses get in the fall. That particular settled quiet. I could hear the refrigerator running. I could see the workshop light I'd left on through the back window. I thought about my wife. I thought about her hands, which were always cold, and how she used to hold her coffee cup with both of them. I thought about the ceramic owl on the shelf upstairs, which is where it is going to stay for as long as I am in this house, and as long as I say so. Melissa called me 3 days later. Her voice was different, careful in a way it had never been with me before. She said she felt like maybe there had been some miscommunication. I said, "No miscommunication, Melissa." She said the comment at the party had come out wrong, that she was just concerned, that she had always liked the house and only wanted the best for our family. I said, "I know." She said, "Is there anything we can do to—" I said, "No. Just that. No." She was quiet for a moment. I said, "I hope you and Nathan have a good evening," and I hung up the phone. That was 7 months ago. Nathan and I have spoken several times since then. We had dinner in January, just the two of us, at a diner we used to go to when he was in high school. It was stilted. There were long pauses. But he came. That matters to me. I don't know what our relationship looks like from here. I don't know if he'll ever fully understand what I did or why. I hope someday he does. Melissa, I haven't spoken to since that phone call. She has not tried again. The joinery class started in October. Wednesday evenings, 2 hours, a good instructor who doesn't over-explain things. There are 11 people in the class, ranging from a 24-year-old woman who is restoring her grandmother's farmhouse to a man roughly my age who lost his workshop in a flood 2 years ago and is starting over. We don't talk much while we work. The sound of the tools is enough. I've been working on a blanket chest. White oak. Hand-cut dovetails on the corners, which are unforgiving and require a patience I have had to relearn. It is taking me longer than I expected. That's fine. I'm not in a hurry. The house is mine. Every piece of furniture in it is something I made or something that was given to me by someone I loved. The second bedroom has a shelf with a cardigan, some photographs, and a small ceramic owl, and nobody is going to tell me what to do with any of it. I want to ask you something before I go. If you had been at that table in September, if you had watched your son pick up his wine glass instead of looking at you, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story meant something to you, stay with me. There's more. I've thought about what I would say if someone asked me whether I regret any of it. The honest answer is not the decisions. I regret the circumstances that made the decisions necessary. There's a version of this story where Melissa never says what she said when Nathan looks at me across that table instead of picking up his glass. Where we have Sunday dinners that are actually about Sunday dinner. I wanted that version. I held on to the possibility of it longer than I should have, probably. That's the part I do differently. Not the ending, but how long I waited before I accepted what I was looking at. What I've come to understand is that every relationship has a shape, and if you pay attention, the shape reveals itself early. Melissa told me who she was the night of Nathan's wedding, standing at the bar in her dress, looking at my house like she was already measuring the rooms. I heard it. I just didn't want to believe it. That's not weakness exactly. It's the normal human resistance to accepting an uncomfortable truth about someone your son loves. But there's a cost to that resistance, and I paid it slowly, Sunday by Sunday, for 6 years. The thing about cause and consequence, and I mean the plain, practical kind, not anything mystical, is that it doesn't skip people. It doesn't make exceptions. What you do with the time and the resources you've been given either builds something or it doesn't. Melissa and Nathan spent 6 years performing the role of a caring family while calculating an inheritance. I spent those same 6 years building furniture in my workshop, taking classes I put off for a decade, paying attention. Those aren't the same 6 years. They don't produce the same results. The ceramic owl is still on the shelf. It will stay there. Not as a protest, not to make a point to anyone, just because it belongs to me and it matters to me, and those are sufficient reasons. I learned late in life that you don't need more justification than that. What you've built, what you've carried, what you've decided to hold on to. Those are yours. Nobody gets to redefine them as a problem just because they've decided they want what's behind them. The blanket chest I've been making is almost finished. White oak, hand-cut dovetails. It took longer than I expected, because I kept having to stop and recut corners that weren't quite right. My instructor told me early on that dovetails will show every mistake you make and every correction too, and that the corrections are nothing to be ashamed of. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The corrections are nothing to be ashamed of. I don't know what Nathan and I will become. I hope we find our way to something real. But I know now that real has to go both directions, or it isn't real at all. What I kept, I kept. What I gave away, I chose to give. That's the whole story, and that's enough.